Hey, this is Ari Herstand, author of How to Make It in the New Music Business, 3rd edition out now, and you're listening to your Morning Coffee podcast with my friends Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart, weekly music news for the new music business.
From Spotify for Artists, fans study, fans make it possible, and we have the data to prove it.
From @Venue, an updated look at artist merch trends in 2023.
And for Music Business Worldwide, user-centric, new study of 50,000 indie SoundCloud artists shows 1 in 5 could double income under streaming model. Well, that's very interesting, Jay. What do you say? We've got so much to talk about today, including lots of Spotify news and lots of other stuff. So Jay and I are very glad you're here, and we are going to push the button right about now.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! The revolution is at hand!
Your morning coffee is on the air. 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 Standing by. Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
Brother Jay, good to see you, man. Good to see you on a Sunday.
Yeah, which is rare for us. It's so good. It's so good hearing Randy Meisner and the Eagles, and sadly, he recently passed away. And that song, "Take It to the Limit," has always been one of my favorite songs. That was written by Randy Meisner with Don Henley and Glenn Frey. Came off of their 4th album, "One of These Nights."
Back in 1975. The single version is almost a minute shorter than the album version. It's the only Eagles A-side not sung by Glenn Frey or Don Henley. And, the single reached number 4 on the U.S. Billboard chart. But if you've seen the documentary, and you and I have talked about it, it's called The History of the Eagles. It is brilliant. It is maybe
one of my favorite.
And we talk about documentaries all the time, but that one is,
it's special.
It's special, and you really, if we were to compile a list of just the top 5 documentaries in music, that would be on the list. I mean, that was a tough band to be in, and if you saw the documentary, you know that Randy Meisner grew concerned about hitting the high notes at the end of that song. So he didn't enjoy playing it live. He didn't like the pressure, and that led to the disputes between he and Don and Glenn. And one of the main reasons he kind of split the band. Just as that was he made it through the tour for Hotel California, and then he was gone. And pretty sad. A lot of these guys are of course, as we've talked about, are leaving the planet and leaving this mortal coil. And it's sad. It's sad to see some of those heroes that we grew up listening to not around anymore.
Well, somebody told me the other day that we're really the first generation with aging rock stars and dying rock stars. I'm sure my parents, with maybe Elvis and some of that, but really it's too common now that we're not only losing people, but he was 77, but we've also, and that's way too young, but we've lost people younger. And, we look at some of these artists now that are still out touring well into their 70s. It's crazy. I mean, Mick Jagger turned 80 last week.
Yes, he did. Paul McCartney is 81, I believe. And if John Lennon were alive, he would be 83. And 83, yeah. And I think Ringo's 83. So, and still out. It's still out playing in the case of Ringo and McCartney. Yeah, absolutely. So it is crazy, crazy, crazy. By the way, Jay, when we do the show, we have sponsors, and we are so lucky to have the great sponsors we have, including Hypebot. Since 2004, Hypebot has chronicled the new music industry and the trends and technologies that are changing how music is discovered, consumed, marketed, and monetized. It is edited daily by founder Bruce Houghton with help from Alana Bonilla. Hypebot and sister blog Music Think Tank are published by live music discovery and marketing platform Bandsintown.
Yeah, and Bandsintown just keeps growing. Over 80 million live music fans trust Bandsintown to get personalized concert alerts, recommendations, and messages from their favorite artists. It's the #1 artist services platform, connecting over 589,000 artists with their superfans. Managers, labels, agencies, and artists access their own dashboard to manage and promote their tour dates across all platforms.
Indeed, and big thanks to the Music Business Association. The Music Business Association creates the rooms in which the important conversations that shape our industry's future take place. We know when we work together, our industry, your business, and your people will be stronger. Our membership represents every major segment of the global music business, including labels and distributors, music streaming, retail and wholesale, publishers and PROs, rights management and metadata, artist managers, tech, and startups. Go over to musicbiz.org for more information. So big thanks to the Music Business Association, Hypebot, and Bandsintown.
Yes,
Certainly
sir.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
And of course, I appreciate the 33rd hardest working man in show business.
Hey,
and
that's
maybe the
me.
most handsome. That's exactly it. That's correct.
That's at 5:10. Yes, sir. And I get to do this podcast every single week with my buddy Mike Etchart, longtime host of Sound and Vision Radio, formerly of SST Records, Warner Music Group, Capital EMI, and Universal Music Groups.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. Well, we've got so much to cover, Jay, and
lots
a lot
of
of it
Spotify
involves
news.
Spotify.
A lot of Spotify
Exactly.
news this week. And we can't go through all of it because it would take the entire show, but we'll pull out the most important points. Couple of stories from Music Business Worldwide, one of our favorite sources. The first one, the headline was Spotify is raising its price in the U.S. and 52 other markets. How much money will that make the music industry? So, it's been 12 long years. And finally, they announced a 10% rise in individual premium subscriptions in the U.S., up from $9.99 to $10.99.
That's right. Spotify is also raising the price of its other subscription plans in the U.S. This includes its family plan, which moves up to $15.99 to $16.99 per month. It's the second time Spotify has upped this particular price point in the U.S. The first was back in 2021 and brings Spotify's family plan pricing in line with that of other services such as Apple Music and YouTube Music.
That's right. And Spotify isn't just increasing prices in the U.S., it's also raising subscription prices across various plans, individual premium, in a whopping 52 other markets, including UK, Canada, Brazil, Spain, France, Australia, Indonesia, Israel, Sweden, and Mexico.
So you may be wondering, how much will this new round of price increases from Spotify be worth to the company and to the music rights holders to whom it pays out around 70% of its income? Well, According to Spotify's own Q1 2023 report, reflecting the end at the end of March, it had 210 million premium subscribers globally, of which approximately 28% resided in North America. That means approximately 58.8 million subs in North America. That's the U.S. plus Canada.
Yeah, and the other piece that I want to touch on really quickly from Music Business Worldwide on Spotify is the headline was Daniel Ek talks AI, artist-centric, TikTok music, and how price hikes are now part of Spotify's quote-unquote toolbox. So Spotify's latest earnings report that you just mentioned, it was released last Tuesday. It showed the company beating guidance, those are projections, on numerous fronts, including monthly active users, which we talked about last episode, and premium subscriptions.
Right. So the platform's monthly average users soared by 36 million in Q2 to 551 million, a 27% year-over-year increase, while the number of paid subscribers jumped 10 million to hit a total of 220 million, which is a 17% year-over-year increase. And the music streaming service reported an adjusted operating loss of 112 million euros, about 13% less than its guidance of 129 million euros for the quarter.
Yeah, and you just did something that I did many times last week, and that is said monthly average users. It's monthly active users.
Active users.
And I said that like 6 times last week, so pardon me. I think people knew what we were getting at. So,
yes, I hope so.
It was Spotify's reported net loss, though, that drew attention of the markets, coming in at 302 million euros for the quarter. That's 1.55 euros per share. It was considerably wider than the 125 million euros loss in Q2 2022. Markets reacted negatively to that news, with Spotify shares dropping almost 14% in early trading on the New York Stock Exchange Tuesday, taking the share price down to around $141 US dollars as of 11:55 on that day Eastern time.
Right. So here's what Daniel Ek said. He said, but when user growth slows down, take Sweden as a great example, where we're already at a massive part of the population there, then price increases become an even more important tool in the toolbox. So here's a few takeaways from their latest earnings report. Number one, audiobooks will be the next one where we will look back and say, wow, that became quite meaningful really fast for Spotify. And this is Daniel Ek again talking.
Yeah, we'll see. He also said AI will create massive improvements in the Spotify experience and create efficiencies for advertisers.
Yeah, he said, by using generative AI and AR tools here, I think you're going to be able to see that we can significantly reduce the cost that it takes for advertisers to develop new ad formats. And also switching to a user-centric or artist-centric payment system won't meaningfully impact Spotify's economics, but the platform is open to hearing how we can make the system fairer to more artists. He also goes on to say, most studies we've done on this show that even if you change it to a user-centric or an artist-centric approach, it seldom leads to these gigantic differences that most people perceive it to do.
Yeah, interesting. The last one was Spotify isn't worried about TikTok moving into the music streaming business. Daniel Ek said, competition is nothing new. It's something that we've been dealing with since the start of the company, and we've had many formidable competitors, and obviously TikTok is one. So those were the takeaways from that. Great coverage, as always, from Music Business Worldwide.
Yeah, and are you somewhat suspect about their thought on audiobooks?
Yeah.
And that seems a little, not aggressive, but just kind of not necessarily something that I see making a dramatic difference.
I agree with you, but I was wrong on podcast too. When they first got into podcast, Apple and some of these other platforms were much more established and deeper into it, and I didn't think that they could put a dent, and they became the number one source. So don't listen to me. I don't know.
Or do the opposite.
Yeah, or do the opposite. One of the things that came out this last week, which was super cool, was MIDiA and Bandsintown they released this study called Return to Live. And it was really fascinating. So we reached out to our friends over at Bandsintown, and we were fortunate to have Fabrice Sergent join us and actually explain what he learned from that Return to Live study. So let's listen to Fabrice Sergent from Bandsintown. Good to see you, Fabrice. MIDiA has just released a landmark report called Return to Live, Post-Pandemic Music Fans. And that's based on data from your company, Bandsintown. What are some of the highlights from that report?
Yes, hi, Jay. Well, the good news is that fans want more live music. And as you know, it's been already last year a record high year post-COVID. But this year, 39% of the concert goers survey, which we surveyed, said that they will attend more shows this year than last year. And only 15% said that they would go to less. That's quite amazing. I would say that some may have anticipated that the unprecedented level of artists being on tour post-COVID created that demand, but that this demand would not last. And we see that actually what it revealed is the essential contribution of live music to people's life. The fact that when we talked about being one of the last tribal experience, an important moment, that was proven by COVID. So this study confirms that this trend is not like a fade, or at least it doesn't seem to fade away. Now, there are challenges that this study reveals, specifically that fans are noticing the increase in prices, artists facing higher costs of touring, ticket increased by sometimes 20%, sometimes 50%. And also because fans are, even though rock still dominates, by a big factor, it's pretty clear that pop is being bigger than ever for the younger generations. These generations are also the ones that are the most exposed to the increased ticket prices because they want to see the big acts. So we may be facing at some point risks that inflation will reduce opportunities for those younger fans to see the most expensive acts. The last thing is that the research produced was that 25% of the fans said that they wanted to see a show because they hadn't seen that artist and they wanted to see it for the first time. So the counterpart of increased prices and inflation, it may be a good news also for the rising acts and the one that are definitely pricing tickets on the lowest end of the spectrum, because those fans may switch from expensive pop acts to less expensive creative rising acts. Also, just because those big and large shows created by pop acts get to sell out, as we all know, what are you going to do? So the demand becomes being unsatisfied. The hunger for live shows and live experience remains strong, and therefore it reports back to new acts. And that's exciting too, frankly.
Yeah, very positive report. Thanks for coming on and helping us to understand it a little bit better, Fabrice. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us, Jay.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
It's well, and we were just looking at the costs, but before we hit record, the costs for the Taylor Swift shows that are coming up next week here in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Woo! That takes your breath away. What's the most money you've spent for a concert ticket?
It was $367 for a show I'm seeing in, 6 weeks, and that is Ghost.
Oh, okay. I think the most I've spent was when I saw McCartney. I spent $400 a seat. Take my family to see McCartney at Hollywood Bowl through our good friend Brian Ray.
Yes.
But that took my breath away at the time. But they were fabulous seats, and it was so worth it. But when you look at the amount right now, even factoring in inflation, I think these Taylor Swift tickets are just off the charts. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much more demand than there is supply, and I have to caveat my answer by I've been very fortunate to work for record companies for decades and to be in this business, and I don't necessarily pay for a lot of concert tickets because I'm either working at the show or I know the manager and I'm maybe going to the show with them. And so I do understand how fortunate we are to not have to pay a lot of these super high prices. And that's why it made it so agreeable, I guess, to pay for those Ghost tickets, because it's the end of the tour. And if you know anything about Ghost, the end of the tour is very special. And I haven't seen them live before. I missed them last time they were here. I absolutely love the band. And I figure, you know what? I don't have to pay for a lot of shows. I want to have decent seats. And so a buddy of mine, we're going to go. It's going to be fun.
Fun. It is always fun to see stuff like that. That'll be a great show. And just really quickly, thank you, Fabrice, for clearing that up for us and showing us, like he had mentioned that 39% of concert goers, surveyed said that they'll attend more shows this year than last. And it comes down to something you and I talk a lot about, and that is fandom. That's what's driving, 90% of these respondents. It's one of their favorite artists, and they got to go. So thanks again for talking us through that report. That was cool. And the exclamation point on that kind of concept is, as we were talking before the hitting record, Taylor Swift is doing 6 nights at SoFi here in Los Angeles. That is unbelievable. That is a giant stadium, and she can sell it out in 6 nights.
That is just crazy to me, which leads us beautifully. This isn't our first story. It's just something we found interesting this last week as I was looking for some really interesting stories. I came across this story it was from the Washington Post, and the headline was, They couldn't get Taylor Swift tickets, so they got jobs at the venues. And I just thought that was really smart. And kind of the sub-headline was, some Swift fans who couldn't procure or afford tickets opted to temporarily work or volunteer at the stadiums and watch the shows for free. That is just absolutely genius. Well played, Swifties. Well played.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tip my hat to those fans that thought that through and made it happen. Yeah. And it's the Taylor Swift thing is just it's on a different level.
It really
as this
is.
article kind of says. It's just when you think about the demand for these tickets, and these tickets by any measure are plentiful, but they are gone in a heartbeat.
That's right. And I learned something from this article. I wasn't aware of this app. It's called Tend, T-E-N-D. And this gentleman named Davis Waddell is the chief executive at that app Tend. And I'll just read you the one part of it. It says, as the founder of an app that connects workers to hospitality gigs, Davis Waddell knows there's always a surge in applications for high-profile events. Football fans clamor to work at the Super Bowl. Baseball and basketball loyalists vie for all-star games, but he's never seen anything like the volume of job seekers who flooded in when the app started offering hourly opportunities for Taylor Swift's Eras tour.
Yeah, he says, again, like we were just saying, Taylor Swift is on a totally different level. He said we're getting probably double or triple the amount of applicants for her. When Swift performed 3 nights at Mercedes-Benz Stadium down in Atlanta in April, he said the app had 65 jobs available for each one, an average of 1,037 people applied per show. So, yeah, a lot of people have the idea, apparently.
Yeah, well, and good for them to find a way to actually get to hear the show and see the show. So I thought that was
yeah, exactly. That is super fandom with an exclamation point, without a doubt.
Yeah, and speaking of super fandom, our first story is really about super fans, and it's from Spotify for Artists, and it's a fan study, which they do fairly regularly. and it says fans make it possible, and we have the data to prove it. And I'll kick it off, and then you can take point number one. They talk about super listeners. There are fans, and then there are diehard fans. Listen on repeat. Buy up all your merch fans. Meet super listeners. The new audience segment available in Spotify for Artists. Discover what super listeners can do for you and how to show them love back.
Well, and guilty as charged, right? You know, when they were describing that, I'm reading that going, yeah, that might be me actually. So it's very interesting to see, you know, and as they say, averaged across all artist sizes, super listeners make up 2% of an artist's monthly listeners, but account for over 18% of monthly streams. Super listener indeed.
Yes.
And you know, I just caught myself. I just drove down to LA last night, and I maybe listened to 5 songs on the way home, and that's an hour and 20-minute drive because there was 5 songs I was grooving on.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to hear those songs over and over again.
Yeah.
And it's just, you know,
that's what
I
you
don't
do.
know that everybody does
you
it.
know, when you're a super fan. And number 2 is releasing new music can supercharge your fan base. That seems a little obvious, but some of your light and moderate listeners are diehard fans in the making. So after releasing new music, on average, artists saw their number of super listeners increase by over 20%.
Yeah, exactly. And then they go over on to number 3, which is super listeners are super loyal too. You may see a boost in super listeners after release, and most will stick around long after that. In fact, over 2/3 of super listeners will still be streaming your music after a 6-month stretch.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I will.
You want to tap into those. Exactly.
Yeah.
How long have we been talking about Ghost?
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those things, like I was in the top 2% of their listeners, you know, last year because, you know, I sort of did a deep dive because I'd sort of dismissed them early on when I saw the makeup and the stage clothes and things. And then as a friend of mine called me up one time and said, no, you got to listen to Tobias Forge. You know, he's like Tom Schultz from Boston. He's writing interesting songs, and it's, you know, it's all that whole Alice Cooper, David Bowie kind of stuff that I love so much. Number 4, super listeners make up an XL number of merch purchases. Well played. When it comes to merch, your super listeners show up big. On average, that's 2% of your monthly listeners account for more than half of your merch purchases. And I think about that with my favorite artists, right? I want to support them. I want to buy the premium vinyl, even though I already have it on streaming or maybe even on CD. You talk about Taylor Swift, you know, and they're buying cassettes and all sorts of things. And they're doing that because, you know, this point, number 4, these are super listeners, and we have no problem buying that merch.
Yeah. Number 5 is your next super listener could be one programmed stream away. Tens of millions of times a day, Spotify listeners actively stream an artist for the first time. Over 40% of those listeners heard that artist via program streaming contexts on or before that same day. Interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think of the artist Hayley Whitters. It was well over a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. But I heard one of her songs in a kind of an Americana playlist, and I just fell in love with it. And then we had her on the Behind the Set List podcast and did an interview. Anyway, long story short, now she's got a song in the top 10, and it's taken a couple of years. And you know how country music, it's a challenge for women, and for her to do that, it just shows that consistency and just staying at it. You know, it's the harder I work, the luckier I get. Number 6, this is really a hot item right now. Want more super listeners? Latin America is all ears. Super listeners span the globe, but that doesn't mean they're evenly distributed. In fact, Latin America has 4 of the top 10 markets with the highest concentration of super listeners, including number 1 and number 2 spots. I did not know that. Very
fascinating. Yeah. So as they end, saying no matter what you want to achieve in music, fans make it possible. Check out more fan study editions for insights to help develop your fan base and reach your goals. Yeah, you gotta love it. But the super fan. And now, when you're listening, so when that song caught your ear and your attention, how far into it were you? Like, because usually I find myself like I'll be kind of not necessarily actively listening. I'll be passively listening, and then something will just like I'll go whoa, wait, and then it's almost like you switch your brain to active listening.
Yes, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, and then then it seems like within about 10 seconds, I'm like, okay, there's something going on here that I just love.
Yeah.
And out comes Shazam or whatever, and that's
sure.
So that's
with me. I was listening to a playlist, and whenever I heard something that I really love, I drag it into my playlist. Right.
Yes.
So I listen to their playlist and I listen. Oh, I want that one. I drop it in. And this one came on, and I knew immediately her voice just didn't sound like anything else on that playlist. Right. And it was so melodic and catchy and clever. And I played it like 3 or 4 times, as we do, right? And that's what started it. But you kind of know pretty early on if something's special. I can't tell you how I know. I can just tell you that when I hear a song or see somebody live, the hair on my arm goes up, or I get a lump in my throat, or however it manifests itself for you, and you just know right away, like, what in the hell is that?
And I remember, I might have mentioned this before on the show, but I remember, what year would that have been? 80s, whenever the first Crowded House album came out. It wasn't even on the radio yet. I was driving. I was listening to a radio station. I lived in West Hollywood at the time, and it was an ad for the album. It wasn't even, they weren't even playing it. It was just an ad for the album, and I heard just a snippet of "Don't Dream It's Over." And I literally drove directly to Tower Records because it was like a mile away on Sunset, and bought the record because it was all I needed was like 5 seconds of that song to go.
It was special. Still one of my favorite albums ever.
Me too. Yes.
I have it framed right here in front of me, signed by the guys. It is one of my top 5 albums ever. It's just amazing.
It's wonderful. So, hey, the next story, Jay, from at Venue, an updated look at artist merch trends in 2023.
Before we jump in, let's explain what at Venue is for people who don't know. If you're a touring artist, and let's say you're selling CDs on the road, but you want them to be considered for placement on the Billboard charts, or you want them to be in Luminate when people look up to see how many you've sold, the way you do that is with at Venue, and it's an app. You register for it, and then you can register your venue sale. So I just wanted to say that because I've never seen an article from at Venue before, and I have since subscribed to their newsletter, but I got this from my business partner, Jeff Moscow. He sent this to me, I think last Thursday, and it was something you and I had talked about. Like, we wondered how much, the average per head at shows. And I'll just kick it off. It says, earlier in the year, we did a pulse check on how many, dollars per head was trending. And now that we're halfway through summer, we want to update how artist merch trends have changed in 2023. We look at fan interest in concert merchandise, the top selling items by genre, super interesting, and how the dollars per head changed since our last update from earlier this year. So let's get started.
Yeah, so they say the average dollar per head for the industry is slightly above 2022, and that's at $8.66. So they say K-pop continues to dominate merch sales with about 1/3 of attendants buying merchandise.
Wow.
The top selling merch items selling 2 times more than any other item is, shockingly, you guessed it, a black t-shirt with the most common sizes tied at medium and large. And hoodies have moved their way up to a top 3 item in most genres.
That's super interesting. So you just said that the average is slightly above last year, and it's now the average is $8.66 per head. So if you're playing a 15,000 seat arena, that's $130,000 in merch. Now, that is overall. If you look at the different genres, like you said, hip hop overperforms, that would have been $160,000. So I would imagine that concerts like Ghost or even, Taylor Swift and some of these probably index a little bit higher. There's certain bands that you go see, and it's, Kiss, for example, and it's so much about the merch.
Yes. Yeah. So getting kind of specific by genre, as you were kind of starting with, we talk in country, it's $7.73 per head typically. That was up actually 29% from last year. Last year was only $6, a little over $6 per head.
That's a big increase.
That's a huge increase. And you wonder, I would love to know kind of the story behind these numbers. Are there more artists out there? Are they different artists that perhaps historically do well with merch? Who knows?
I think it's some of these big country tours that have been going, whether it's Shania or Luke Combs or whoever it is. There's been, and people are getting back to bigger and better tours and bigger arenas and all of that. But we saw that year over year growth. We talked about how hip hop kind of overperforms everybody else, but it was down 6% year over year.
Yeah, $10.70 this year. Last year it was $11.34 per head. Alternative artists, they're kind of in the same. They're actually up 7% this year. They're at $10.40 this year, up from $9.74. Pop also a little over $10. Last year was a little under $10, so that changed by up 3%. And then rock, $8.47, and they're down 5% this year. It was $8.88 last year.
Yeah, and again, you kind of want to know why, like what tours, because you're comparing apples to chainsaws, when you're, because you don't,
as I often do,
because you don't know, what artists toured last year and this year. I mean, they do, and we could probably look it up if we had the time. But they say that the percentage of attendance buying merch by genre, it's super interesting. Like you said, 31% of the crowd is going to be buying merch on average at a K-pop show. Well, a fifth of the crowd at pop and alternative and heavy metal and rock. I mean, they're all about a fifth of the crowd roughly. And the two genres that sort of underperformed compared to the other genres, country and EDM, which sort of surprises me. And I wonder if there's limited items in merch, especially like at an EDM concert, because you're talking about typically one DJ or several DJs as opposed, if I can spit it out, to like a band.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I just need to know more, Jay. But they're saying here the top selling items by genre, by numbers sold. T-shirts, unsurprisingly, continue to be the most popular item, with a single T-shirt averaging 38% of a band's gross sales.
Wow.
Hoodies have grown in popularity as a top-selling item in all genres. Again, besides country, do country fans not wear hoodies? What's the deal?
Well, let's break it down, because they do a great job in this piece talking about what items sell per genre, because it's different, and I'll just take the first two. With country, the top three items: T-shirt, koozie, right, and a hat. Okay, that's country. But if you look at hip hop, it's a T-shirt, but then it's the hoodie and the long sleeve, not the koozie and the hat.
Yeah, exactly. Alternative is T-shirt, then hoodie, then vinyl, and pop is T-shirt, hoodie, long sleeve, presumably T-shirt. Interesting.
And then to finish it off, in the rock world, this was surprising to me: T-shirt, hoodie, and poster, because I find it really hard to carry some of the stuff around at a show, right?
Yes.
And so you want to get it early so they're not sold out of the vinyl, that you really want. But do you really want to carry a poster around a show or a festival? I don't.
No, gets easily damaged. But this is a fascinating and I can't remember when we were talking about that, wondering kind of details about what the head number is. What does an average person attending a concert spend on merchandise?
Yeah,
again, it's big numbers.
Yeah,
it is big numbers.
And the only thing I would add to this discussion is, I thought that was just a great piece. I was always really curious about what that number was on average per head. I put a video in your morning coffee in the newsletter right underneath that story by this gentleman who goes by Tank the Tech. And there's a video he got. Well, the headline is, "An arena band gave me their actual merch income sheet," and it's mind-blowing. So if you want to dig into the merch side, this goes deep. I mean, it covers the truck and the drivers and flights and hotels and all the different things. But the bottom line is, from this video, is that this band made about $125,000 that night gross on merch, and they only took home 8%. 8%. Whoa. The rest of it was eaten up. Well, and this was a European tour, so you had things like the venue fee was 25%. So the venue's taking 25% of the merch just right off the top, right? But then since they were in Europe, they had this VAT, value added tax, which was another 25%. So there's half of their merch is out the door just like that. So a lot of mouths to feed.
And I wonder, too, kind of what the margins are on merch. You know, when you look at these numbers, the $8.66 per head, typically spending. But what's the margin on that? What's the cost of merch?
Oh, it's huge. Well, we deal in that on the merch side. So I have a kind of a view into, and obviously it's just like CDs or vinyl or anything else. If you make 100, they cost one price. If you make 100,000, they cost a lot less. And some of these tours that we're talking about, Taylor Swift, for example, they're making a ton. So they're making even more money because they're paying less for those goods. But there are touring bands that I work with right now that are making about half their revenue on merch and then the other half, on the venue side. So it's big business. You can make a lot of money on merch. But when there's money, there's people who want a piece of that pie. And that's, we talked about Jackie Venson last week. If you didn't listen to the podcast, you got to check that out. Look at the newsletter from last week, the op-ed by Jackie Venson. She talks about how venues are getting more and more aggressive at taking a cut of the artist revenue. Yeah. It's harsh. Very harsh. Anyway, great article, great website and newsletter, I'm sure. So at Venue, fascinating data. And our last story from Music Business Worldwide, user-centric. New study of 50,000 indie SoundCloud artists shows 1 in 5 could double income under streaming model. And that is very interesting. But as you know, as you say, Jay, but if one person taketh, another person giveth away. And so it's got to come from somewhere, right? That's right. And it's a kind of a zero-sum game. Music streaming services switching to user-centric payment model, it would have a significant impact on the payments artists receive, with 1 in 5 artists, as you just said, doubling their earnings. But 4 in 10 could see significant drops. And that's kind of the secret sub-menu right there. If there's a winner, there's a loser, interesting. Right?
There is a loser, right? This, by the way, is by Daniel Tensor over at Music Business Worldwide. He says, music streaming services switching to a user-centric payment model would have a significant impact on the payments artists receive, with 1 in 5, as we said, artists doubling their earnings, while 4 in 10 could see significant drops. That's according to the results of a new study from Germany-headquartered music services firm Pro Music. The study found that 29.3% of artists would see an increase in income of 40% or more when compared to the pro rata model of payments currently favored by most streaming platforms. That's a good number if you're getting that.
Yeah, and you should check out that report that they're talking about. They linked to it Ryan Rauscher, who is a digital music specialist with a focus on DSPs and UGC, user-generated platforms. The headline is "The Impact of a User-Centric Payment System, Not Marginal." In previous articles, he says he's discussed the problem with the current payment model called pro rata, right? After explaining that the problem is not that it unduly favors mainstream artists, that it's not streaming fraud or lack of transparency. He argues that instead, the issue is that pro rata does not do a good job at representing consumer demand and the value created by artists and their music. So, he says that a user-centric payment system, UCPS, he doesn't think it would change much.
Yeah, interesting. He says, so while the gainers are 19% smaller in terms of streams, they're actually on an average 40% bigger when measured in users' reach, the study said. So there's a lot of interesting, again, but to me, as I'm thinking about this stuff, so there's not a lot, there's give and take in all of these these different models. But what's the most fair? And to me, the most fair is that people who people are spending time with the most should be compensated the most in general.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think that whether or not there are a lot of winners and losers when you switch from pro rata to user centric, it feels like the right thing to do.
Yes, it feels like the right thing to do. And so therefore maybe it is the right thing to do. So let's just put our foot down and make that happen starting Monday. What do you say?
Right. Well, this study found that there were 3 principal factors that would result in an artist receiving more money under the user-centric model versus pro rata. Number 1, an artist relative user reach. What that means is the more users an artist reaches relative to their total number of streams, the more they are favored under the user-centric model.
Okay, so number 2 is an artist's average user commitment. The higher the share of a user's total listening time is devoted to a particular artist, the more that artist is favored under the user-centric model.
So an artist's relative average user spend, okay, that means the more money an artist listeners spend on their subscriptions, for example, by purchasing higher tier services, paid versus free, the more an artist is favored by the user-centric model.
Right. So what's interesting is the Pro Music study results contrast with earlier studies, which found a less pronounced impact on artists' earnings from a switch to the user-centric model.
Yeah.
And they wanted to say, for instance, a 2021 study from the France-based Centre National de la Musique.
It's easy for you to say.
Jeez, not at all. Which looked at artists and listeners on streaming services Deezer and Spotify, found that the top 10 most listened to artists on Deezer would receive 17.2% lower royalty payments under the user-centric model compared to the pro rata model, while the top 10 artists on Spotify would receive 12.5% less under user-centric payments.
I remember us covering that story when it came out. And, results like this may be why major record companies appear to be reluctant to support a user-centric approach to payments. And they've increasingly come out in favor of the artist-centric model, which would reward artists according to the quote-unquote added value they bring to a streaming platform. For instance, an artist that typically starts users' listening sessions or is able to bring in new signups to the platform would receive higher payments per stream under the artist-centric model.
Right. So, I don't know. We're going to see... This is one of those things that we talk about all the time.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's just conflicting data here
That's
and there.
right.
But I still go back to the overarching concept, which is what is the more fair? And yes, some will be positively benefited, some will be negatively, changed in terms of how much money they're making. But it just seems inherently fairer to do the user-centric model.
Yeah.
So
that's
the
way it seems to me. To me as well, there's as we always say, thank you, Ricky Warwick, there's 3 sides to every story, yours, mine, and the truth. And we have seen conflicting data on both sides of this, but it seems like there's more analysis being done. And again, this was a super interesting report using data from SoundCloud, which is sort of leading the charge here for user-centric payments. So
yes,
well done by
and
Daniel Tenser, by the way, over at Music Business
Yes.
Worldwide. Nicely done.
Thank you, Daniel. And it gets me back to thinking about this kind of mysterious thing that Universal is doing. These conversations they're having with, figuring out ways to make it more fair. I wonder what's going on with that. Maybe we should. Well, let's after the show. Let's stop by Lucian's house and ask what's going on.
Yeah, maybe go have a cup of coffee.
That's right.
All right.
I'm sure he would answer the door.
Sure.
All right. On that note, we're going to wrap it up. We want to thank our good friends over at the Music Business Association, Hypebot, and Bandsintown for helping us put the show together every week. We could not do it without those wonderful folks. And if you enjoyed the show, please tell one friend. I know Jay and I would greatly appreciate that. And on that note, Jay and I say big thanks for checking us out today, and we will be back next time on the Your Morning Coffee Podcast.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.